Hello, this is the third lesson on Zoella. It's all about audience, and the objectives are to analyse the target audience and the appeals for Zoella's blog and vlog and her content, pretty much everything that she does, and understand how online media changes traditional appeals. So first of all, an obvious question: can you provide a profile of Zoella's target audience? Have a think about things like the income and status model, and of course not just demographics but psychographic classifications like the 4Cs model. Is there more than one? Now, interestingly, the YouGov website provides, or used to provide, quite good profiles for different media products and brands. It could be anything really. It could be a football team, a band, a celebrity, a kind of a brand product of some sort. Anyway, and whilst they were providing this service, they did this for celebrities, and Zoella was one of them as well. So this is some of the facts that they came out with. This is obviously based on different polling data and information that's submitted on various questionnaires and stuff, not necessarily that would be specifically about Zoella. Demographics, they've suggested female gender, aged 18 to 24, and whose social grade fit within the C2s, Ds and Es. I think it'd be quite hard to argue against any of those things. I think the content's quite obviously aimed at female. Maybe since the new revamp of her content, it might be considered maybe a little bit more of an even split, but certainly there's a bias towards the female audience. The age group probably looks good, perhaps maybe moving up slightly as Zoella herself gets older. And the social grade, whilst she herself obviously fits quite neatly into the A and B category, I think it's quite interesting to suggest that she has an appeal to a more working class audience, or lower middle class working class audience. You may agree or disagree with that. It seems that her fandom is most likely to come from the East Anglia in the southeast of England, part of the home counties. Again, I would say that that's probably quite accurate. Politically, that her fan base is more likely to be to the left, but fairly centrist. That might be due to the youth of the audience as well. Now, this is where the YouGov website maybe goes a little bit odd every now and then. The main profession it suggested would be in engineering, followed by fashion design and home and garden. Now, that looks a little bit skew-if, but it depends what they consider to be under engineering. But certainly if we look at fashion design and home and garden, those things do make sense. And that monthly expendable income, less than £125 a month, which would fit in with some of the other factors here. As for the 4Cs model, I'm sure that you probably included the mainstreamer for the brand identity, and for the relatability and the familiarity of her work and her products. It's been going for many years now. Whilst the content may have had a revamp, I think we agreed that ideologically it stayed pretty much the same. Then you've got also the aspirer as well. I'm sure many of you would have maybe had that as your first one. So quite a lot of Zoella's content is arguably superficial. It focuses more on the consumerist aspects of life, such as clothing and makeup and hair, and how you based on appearance, but also on the acquisitive side of life, home lifestyle tips and hints and aspirational ideas for lifestyles. She herself, of course, would be considered a succeeder, but we're not analysing her. We are looking at who the audience is. And I would still say, whilst there may be some succeeders who are out there looking at her content, the vast bulk of the audience would come from that aspirer and mainstreamer group. Now, it's all very well and good getting the answers to these, but can you find the evidence that fits Okay, the evidence needs to be from the content. So do you have plenty of evidence from both her blogs, vlogs, and her website that proves the data that's on the screen there, as well as the fact that her audience comes from a mainstream and aspirer psychographic group. We have looked at other classification methods, of course, and one that is considered for media texts that target a younger audience is the lifestyle categories. The method is based on people's outlooks on life rather than their needs, and it's a look on their kind of lifestyle choices. 12 categories that, like I said, these are often used when talking about media products that target young people. Who would you say she targets with her content? Well, I think groupies are definitely a key one that jump out there, being most similar to the aspirers from the 4Cs, I guess. I think possibly you could argue that trendies as well, even though they try and lead the curve a little bit more, possibly would use her website for finding research or finding out more about what's on that kind of on trend. I don't think we would go as far as innovators probably. Arguably the content is materialistically driven enough to suggest egoists, although that might be slightly harsh on some of the kind of key ideologies that she promotes. So I think we'd probably stick with mostly likely to be trendies and groupies. So let's have a think about what appeals come with this. Now that we know who we're talking about, we should be able to work out what the appeals are. We can look at the lines of appeals document that we've studied intensely for the component 1 section on advertising, and of course our old friend the uses and gratifications model. So have a think though, are some of the appeals more relevant for specific audiences? And there are some other appeals that we may not have considered that come specifically through the mode of address. So one of these is what we call parasocial interaction, which is that illusion of face-to-face conversation that's constructed specifically through her vlogs and the techniques that she uses in her videos. And then, of course, collaboration videos, which is a video that features 2 or more content creators working together, which have become a kind of convention of the medium. Now, the question is really, these appeals that we've discussed so far are all quite well established in analysing the media. They've, as I said, the lines of appeal really is a document that I use to discuss with advertising and has been around a long time. The uses and gratifications model was developed for television in the 1970s, but is applicable or adaptable, I should say, to other types of media. But we're talking about the internet, and whilst the internet has been around, for common use for over 25 years now, do we think it is an adequate way of describing the relationship between an audience and the text, or is it a bit more complicated than that? And this is where we move on to how media audiences have changed and shifted, and how we can look at the change between them, and what we describe as Web 2.0. So I'm going to show you a quick video, which is really David Gauntlet, the man himself, talking through a lecture of his own, actually. So it's not so much a video, but more a sort of voiceover to some more slides, you'll be glad to know. But it is really interesting, and obviously whilst you're watching, have a think about how the extent to which we can apply these ideas to Zoella's brand and all of her platforms as well.
Hello and welcome to the video version of the lecture Media and Everyday Life. I'm David Gauntlet from the University of Westminster. The title is Media and Everyday Life, but really I'm going to be talking about the changing place of media in everyday life. There have been certain changes in the past 10 or so years to media consumption, which make it a bit more interesting and different to before. Speaking of before, we might picture it something like this. Some people sitting around a radio set looking at the radio times, wondering what's going to be on and when, or some people queuing up for an 8 o'clock showing of a movie at a cinema. You'll have noticed the importance of time here, schedules set by the media, which people, the public media consumers, have to respond to and shape their lives around. Also, psychologically, that means that the media has a kind of dominant role, making people somewhat more passive and subservient because they have to fit their lives in around the media. In the past, also, to create media, you needed big stuff, big recording devices, big cameras, and if you wanted to distribute it all, you needed a big broadcasting company or movie studio. That's not easy. Most people don't own these things and therefore couldn't do it. These days, of course, we can produce and share media using small and reasonably cheap devices such as laptops or even mobiles. That work ends up on sites like YouTube, where the work of many thousands of directors is seen by literally millions of people who look at their homemade videos where people just typically talk about their lives and stuff that's happening to them and manage to gain a large audience. That's now. Before, it was more like this. The media were like gods up in the heavens, distributing their stuff to the little people down below who had very little control. It was like media was handed down from on high, both in terms of how and when you could get it, and also in its general tone and attitude. If we look back at that picture of Broadcasting House, you'll see it looks pretty much like a church, big, powerful, solid building with a steeple. Newspapers in the past used to be big and authoritative looking. Even record companies had their own big, solid buildings commanding the skyline. These days, it's not so much like that. But in the past, the media sent down their messages in this one way from them down to us. In short, it looks pretty much like that. You've got a broadcaster sending out its messages to the world. These days, it's not like that. There are websites like YouTube, MySpace, Wikipedia, where all of the content is provided by the users and then is distributed very widely to other diverse users around the world. There is still, of course, competition from the big media corporations, so we have to stick them on as well. All of this is helped along, of course, by Web 2.0. My simple explanation of Web 1 and Web 2 is that Web 1.0, if we want to call it that, was like people creating their own separate little gardens, separately from each other. Web 2.0 is everybody contributing to the allotment that we all make together. That was the idea that Tim Berners-Lee had in 1991 when he invented the World Wide Web. He thought that everybody would be contributing to sites. But for many years it didn't really work like that, and it wasn't even clear how it could work like that. But nowadays, in the past year or so, the idea of Web 2.0 has become much more accepted. People contributing collectively to a sum of knowledge that exists online. So that's Web 2.0. If we want to picture how these changes have taken place, it's not really like this. There wasn't the traditional place of media that I talked about at the start, which has suddenly been replaced by these new uses of the media. Instead, the traditional uses have been slowly joined by these new uses that I'm talking about. In a book called TV Living, which tracked people's media consumption over 5 years from 1991 to 1996, and people kept diaries about their media consumption, one of the key themes we found was the theme of time. People were overwhelmingly conscious of time. Their personal schedules had to be built around the media schedules, and the amount of time they spent watching TV was also significant to them. They felt kind of guilty, but they didn't mind too much. And changes of their lifestyle over time were reflected in changes in their media consumption. These things will have changed, but to what extent? Today we see news stories reporting that people are watching television less and are online more. This story finding it surprising that women are spending even more time than men online. This story reporting that TV viewing is dropping and being replaced by people spending time online. The way we understand and consume politics now is changing, perhaps in the YouTube era, where, for example, here a Barack Obama speech has been turned into a music video, which has helped to rally support for him, and the famous I'm in Love with Obama song from Obama Girl helped raise awareness and support for Barack Obama, seen here making his own presentation of his plans for 2008 on YouTube. Hillary Clinton has had to follow suit. She's been made fun of in some videos. She's making her own official videos where she states her policies. Gordon Brown also appears on the 10 Downing Street website, normally being quite dull. He gets made fun of in other videos for being quite dull. Finally, in this book by Richard Sennett, which has just been published, The Craftsman, less sexistly craftsperson, he talks about the idea of the craftsperson being engaged with their work and wanting to do good work. A craftsperson typically takes 10,000 hours to master the thing that they do. So it's spending time and taking pride in your work to make something. Sennett suggests that craftsmanship leads to a sense of well-being and self-esteem. And maybe we're seeing with the rise of YouTube and video sharing and photo sharing sites and other sites where people make things and put them online and share them with other people, we're entering an era where there's this pleasure in making things is having a real resurgence. So there was only recently a dip in the 20th century where people had to consume media made by other people. Nowadays, we're getting back to more of a folk culture where people can make and share their own stories with other people. You can read a summary of Sennett's Craftsman argument by typing Sennett Craftsman into Google and reading the Guardian article there and some of the reviews. So that's the end of this little video. I hope it worked. Sorry about any clunky little edits, and I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, so really interesting stuff there from David Gauntlet. Obviously should have caveated that by saying it's a few years old now. Although, other than what feels like an incredibly retro reference to MySpace, I think a lot of these ideas still remain largely true. To what extent can we apply them to Zoella's brand and platforms? Now, if we look at this and sort of try and articulate it on the page, digital technologies and the growth of the internet have obviously dramatically altered our media landscape. The biggest impact is challenging challenging those traditional relationships between media producers, products, and audiences, which was very much a linear process like this. Certainly, when growing up, my consumption of the media and certainly studying the media in education was that there are media producers who make products, and those products go to audiences. And of course, whilst we know, and we should be talking about later, that decodings do not necessarily come from encodings, this was still the format. Now, blogs and vlogs have been instrumental in a change reflecting a cultural shift towards a different pattern that might look something a bit more like this. We have interaction, participation, connection, and collaboration. And all of these words refer to a use that we might have of the media, rather than it being a one-way process where media producers produce products that we just consume. All four of these words describe a function of the media product, but also a choice. I think that's the key thing there. A choice of what the audience will do with that media product. And of course, at the heart of that is Web 2.0, which loosely describes a new phase in the internet's development characterized by interactivity, user participation, connection, and collaboration. And whether we should still call it a new is up for debate, I guess. But it's very different to the original development of the web, where websites were built as endpoints and people would visit them and that would be it. Yes, there might be links away from them, but the purpose was to keep you on site reading and consuming that information as if it were simply a magazine or an advert. Now, Web 2.0 and the huge, massive popularity of social media platforms such as Facebook or Instagram or YouTube is much more a part of what we would call a participatory culture. And really, the participatory culture is the opposite of a consumer culture. In other words, a culture in which private individuals, i.e. us, the public, do not act just as consumers, passively soaking up the media, but also we can be contributors or producers, or, as we've seen from previous lessons, prosumers, which links to the ideas of Henry Jenkins. So let's have a quick look at Jenkins and its further explanation of participatory culture, and see if we can decide whether or not Zoella is a good example of a convergent and a participatory culture online, or has she become what maybe Gauntlet has described as one of the media gods that has much more control over the content that we consume? Anyway, watch the video, be conscious of her content whilst you're watching and making notes. Have a think about this.
We're definitely at a moment of transition, a moment where an old media system is dying and a new media system is being born. An era when spectatorial culture is giving way to participatory culture, where a society based on a small number of companies controlling the storytelling apparatus is giving way to a much more complex mediascape where average citizens have the ability to seize control over the media technology and tell their own stories in powerful new ways. If we go back over thousands of years of human history, the most important stories were retold many, many times around the campfire. They belong to the folk. As we move into the 20th century, those images now belong to major media companies who claim exclusive ownership of it. What we're seeing is in the digital age, as the public begins to take media in its own hands and begins to assert its right to retell those stories, the public are taking media without the permission of copyright holders and innovating, experimenting, recontextualizing, responding to those images in new ways. We take control of the media as it enters our lives, and that's the essence of convergence culture. Convergence culture is a world where every story, every sound, brand, image, relationship plays itself out across the maximum number of media channels. It's shaped as much by the decisions made in teenagers' bedrooms as it is by the decisions made in the Viacom boardroom. So a discussion list online or a Wikipedia function according to collective intelligence, where the group as a whole can put together knowledge in a more complex way than any individual member is capable of doing. We are developing technologies around collective intelligence which allow us to monitor government-produced data in ways that would have been impossible before. We're seeing human rights activists taking videos recorded by torturers and turning them around and using them to call attention to the role of torture around the planet. George Orwell imagined a world where Big Brother was watching us, but we instead, with little cell phone cameras, are watching Big Brother every moment of the day. In a transmedia project, the story or experience is spread across a variety of media platforms, not in a way that's redundant, but rather in a way that's complementary, so that each platform contributes what it does best.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
Popular entertainment so far has been the best at exploiting these core principles. We might look at The Matrix as a story that unfolds across 3 feature films, a dozen animated short subjects, about 20 comic book stories, about 3 video games, and continues to expand as the audience takes it up and creates fan fiction, or fan art, or fan costumes, or fan theater. The advantage a documentary filmmaker has is that we're already depicting a world. The reality is already cross-platform, and the reality is complex enough to allow us to have many different characters with many different stories on many different platforms.
It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can.
So far, the biggest nonfiction success of transmedia storytelling is the Obama campaign. Here we see this political figure, relatively unknown 4 years ago, who exploded on the national scene by exploring every available media platform. Social network spaces like Facebook and MySpace, cell phone technology to connect to the voters. YouTube is a platform for distributing both official video and allowing consumers to produce their own grassroots video.
We will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can.
A world governed by principles of participatory culture has the potential to be much more diverse than a world controlled by a small number of media producers. As average people develop the ability to tell their stories, we're seeing different perspectives emerge. We're seeing different groups gain representation. We're seeing groups challenge the dominant media images that have been constructed for their lives. And the challenge for those of us caring about social justice issues is to make sure that these tools get in the hands of those people who have been the most oppressed and most dispossessed to get their stories out and get their stories into circulation. As we expand who has the power to tell stories, we have the potential for stories to grab our imagination, to touch our hearts, that come not from the entertainment infrastructure, but from some average citizen out there whose reality has never been depicted on the screen before. And I think that's the real excitement of our present moment of media change.
So, some really, really interesting ideas there from Henry Jenkins that, again, a few years old, but still becoming more and more relevant all the time. And whilst Zoella's content may well come from an era where blogging and vlogging was a complete antithesis of old school media, traditional media, it is born out of an ability for anybody to pick up a camera and get themselves online and to a broad audience. Guerrilla journal, or gonzo journalism, guerrilla filmmaking, participatory culture, where people are able to take control of different types of media as opposed to the old-fashioned media gods. But does Zoella's content really look like citizenship journalism? Does it really look like giving a voice to those who have been voiceless for decades, if not centuries? There's a big question mark over whether or not is Zoella a really good example of a convergent and participatory culture that is really tearing up the rule book when it comes to what the media is, or has she become, or has she always been, really one of the media gods? Very much like the old traditional media. It's just that she's found her home in a new media format. Interesting questions and a great debate to be had. But you can decide on the answers, and your evidence is her content. Let's move on to another well-known audience theory that we should be pretty secure with at this stage, and that's George Gerbner's cultivation model, which of course is the idea that exposure to repeated patterns or representations over long periods of time can shape and influence the way in which we perceive the world around them. In other words, it cultivates particular views and opinions or ideologies. And the idea that cultivation reinforces mainstream values, or what we would call dominant ideologies. Let's think about this. Zoella's vlogs are uploaded every few days or every week, and they're subscribed to by loyal followers who will watch the vlogs and read her website on a regular basis. And of course, therefore, we would assume that Zoella's content, as a brand, as a media product, lends herself to Gerbner's theory pretty well. So let's think back to the stuff we did on representations, where you investigated the ideologies in her blog and on her YouTube channels and the role they play in constructing and maintaining gender norms. In this way, could we argue perhaps that there are a set of ideologies that Zoella and the Zoella content reinforces as mainstream dominant ideologies to her largely mainstream audience? Okay, so as we know, a little bit, cultivation model is a kind of halfway house between sort of looking at audiences as active, but also maybe slightly passive to content as well. The one model that we do know that thinks of the audience as being active in their consumption is, of course, audience responses and reception theory. So make a list. What do the blogs and vlogs of Zoella want their target audience to take away from the products? And what ideologies do they inherently represent? Write all those things down and you now have the preferred reading. However, of course, if we're going to consider away from the preferred reading, what reasons are there that someone might take an oppositional or a negotiated reading to any of the Zoella content, whether it's her website or her blogs? Well, as we've seen, Zoella has worked hard to mediate her brand. We've talked about the things she does to construct and reinforce the ideologies and also the tone and the feel of exactly who she is throughout her career. And despite that squeaky clean girl next door representation, Zoella hasn't been without her own controversies and, of course, therefore her own critics as well. An example here of something that surfaced a while back, and it's bound to catch up with any celebrity at some point, it seems. The old tweet controversy. This was an apology she made a couple of years ago now. I've seen a few of my old tweets from 7 or 8 years ago floating around, which I've now deleted using words like chav and skank. In other words, I wouldn't use now part of my language, and a lot of them were taken out of context referring to TV shows, but I would never say those things now. I'm sorry if I've offended anyone, that was not my intention. Obviously, that is not who I am today, and I'd like to think I'm a little older and wiser. I'm not perfect, and I've never claimed to be. I'm only human. This came after a sort of barrage of backlash that she got from when those tweets resurfaced. Now, have a think. How does this alter the message that's being sent out? Remember, we talk about representations being a construction of every media product that added together. Those tweets added to that representation. Her apology adds to her representation. What are the dangers of stories like this surfacing? Conversely, though, can these controversies, these hauntings from the past, can they ever be used to celebrities' advantage? The final question, can online media ever be context-proof? In other words, is there always the potential that any content that arrives on social media, whether it be YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, can it ever be safeguarded against the future? Well, one other oppositional reading that was taken, a little bit more famously, I'd say, was the controversy over her advent calendar. Before we talk about what the problem was, let's have a look at her little promotional materials for her advent calendar and talking about it as it was being released.
Hi, so today I am doing the much requested video talking you through all the new lifestyle gifting products which are going into Boots and online at Boots. I did show some of these in my Winter Wonderland vlog, which if you haven't seen, make sure you go and check it out. I'll leave a little link in the description box, but you can also find it on my channel somewhere around. I'm really, really excited about this collection just because I love the colour combination. I love the colour combination so much. I love the design, I love the pattern, and I absolutely love the products. And I really hope you do too. So I'm going to start, I'll start with like the bigger things, I think. So we have done a lifestyle advent calendar. You know how much I love advent calendars. Every year I have about 30 of these, and I really, really wanted to do one myself. I thought it would be really, really nice to have one, especially with things like homey bits in, because those are all the things I love, and I feel like there aren't many that offer like a variety of different lifestyle things. You've got ones that might specialize solely in candles, like the Yankee ones, and last year I had the Diptyque, the Diptyque one. This was so hard to get right, and I really, really wanted it to be absolutely perfect.
too bad, because unfortunately it wasn't too perfect. There are a number of issues, starting with the fact that there were only 12 doors in this advent calendar, which is quite difficult to understand. But the biggest problem was the price for the quality of goods that came inside. Just linked to a couple of tweets there from people, and the fact that the Boots, who were the supplier, had to drop the price quite significantly after quite a backlash again from consumers, from audiences who wouldn't just accept that they should pay this amount for what they consider to be quite low quality. Now, it's very tricky for someone like this to be in this situation, particularly when social media demands that they have to or have the ability to respond. So here is Zoella's response to the criticism she got. You can decide whether this is an actual apology or not. I think it's questionable. But what's more important, I suppose, is to consider the backlash as either negotiated or oppositional readings to her content, and then for you to decide how this response, does it recover, does it save, does it change the representation, does it add to the ideologies in any way? What do you think?
So I was editing this vlog that you have just watched, and I thought I would put this little bit in at the end because there has been some upset, disappointed people in the Zoella Lifestyle Advent Calendar, more specifically the price of the calendar. And I didn't want to not address it because I want you guys to know I do care about how you feel about things, and the last thing I want to do is anger, upset, or disappoint anyone, because that is not my intention in the slightest. So I thought it would be weird for me to kind of end this vlog like this whilst there's people that are upset with the calendar price. The calendar is something I've worked on for a year. I love the product. I am all about the creativity. I'm all about getting it from a design to a product. Where my input ends is there. Once that product is done and I'm happy with it, the retailer can decide how much they sell that for. That's completely out of my decision making. I don't have the right to make those decisions. So it makes me so sad that a product that I loved and worked hard on, and that loads of you like the product, it is just having that product at the price that was out of my decision has left so many people so upset. And I feel just as let down by this also, and the price of any product is up to a retailer, and I know that there's some of you that might not have known that, so I wanted to come on here and like explain that to you, because even my mum didn't realise that. I don't want people to think that I'm like sat at home like counting £50 every time someone buys this calendar, thinking that that was a conscious decision that I made to rip people off. Because if you know me, you know that there is not a bone in my body that would think that way. And it makes me so sad that anyone would think that that was my intention, because that is 100% not my intention. My intention was to make a product that I thought you guys would love, which I still think is a product that I think you would love. It's just been completely ruined by a decision that I didn't make, and it's so frustrating. My input in this is creative. It's coming up with new ideas. It's new, like, cool packaging concepts. It's new scents. It's new things we can do. And it's like testing formulations, and it's all those things. That's where I get involved in this, and I'm very heavily involved in that, and I love it. Like, I'm currently on my desk in front of me, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 products that I am currently testing and making sure are right for you guys. And I don't get to talk about these things that much because I don't know how much you'd be interested in the process of these things, but also if some of these don't go ahead, then I don't want to like talk about them in case they don't happen. And these things take years to get right, and that's all I can do. And past that point, it's handed over. It's like a baby that's handed over to somebody else, and then they get to choose what they do with that. And I think after seeing some people's feedback on this, it's quite obvious that the decision that was made by the retailer was the wrong decision, and I'm sure that they will take that information and they will take this on board. I really hope that this has made sense to you. It's a really difficult process to explain. Like, there's not just like me and then like 3 people that like do these. There are teams and teams of people, teams that are not my teams, the licensing and the retailer and the production. There's a lot of people. You know, I don't sit at home like packing it all myself and sending it out to you and the money comes straight into my PayPal. That's not what happens. That's not how it works. It's really complex, and there's a lot of people and there's a lot of decisions, and not all those decisions are mine to make, and the price is one of them. So I'm really sorry that so many of you felt so let down by this product. I really hope that this kind of clears that up for you, because there's a lot of people that think I chose that price and that I don't care and that I'm doing it for the money, and that makes me so sad, because that's not who I am. That is not why I do this, and if you know me, you know that. So there's no point me rattling on about that. I'm not here to justify myself as a person, because you either know me or you don't, and this is just a rubbish situation that hopefully a lot of people can learn from. That's that. I hope that's cleared that up for you. Thank you so much to all of you who support the brands and have voiced your concern in a more calmer manner. I have really, really appreciated it. So yeah, that's it for now, but thank you for listening, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.
Really interesting video, which I think is so unusual as part of her brand identity. It's so different to the usual kind of messaging, and yet other parts of it really are trying to stick with the brand. You know, we've turned the fairy lights up to 11. There are lots of jump cuts which show that some of this was obviously too difficult to continue, but some of it comes across as looking quite contrived, because it contrasts with what she sort of her usual brand identity. There's almost kind of a Wizard of Oz thing here, where the curtain's been pulled back and she talks about, you know, product testing and huge teams of people. It all feels incredibly corporate compared to the usual shtick of a young girl just testing out some products that anyone can get hold of and you might find is nice to get, or the sort of almost the quirky, chintzy, creative aspects of here's just some stuff I think is cool and quirky. All of a sudden it's part of a much bigger machine and a factory line and anonymous beings that you don't know that control the prices and corporate elements and stuff like that. So she's tried to distance herself very much from the kind of the problem, but at the same time she's had to reveal a lot of what's going on. I think it's interesting that she tries to sort of, you know, without being too judgmental, sort of squeeze the emotion out of this, and she seems clearly frustrated, whereas another celebrity might have kind of turned on the waterworks a bit and become quite upset. She doesn't quite seem to get there. She seems more annoyed with this. Whether that helps with the you know, the changing of the message, I don't know, but certainly you can look at why people might take a negotiated or oppositional reading to her products or to her content when you see a video like that. Read the Daisy Buchanan article from 2014. Have a think. Do you think she's made an oppositional reading to Zoella's content there, or do you think she's missed the point and maybe provided more of a negotiated reading? Anyway, all in all, lots of really interesting stuff about how sometimes that preferred reading, even as well controlled as it is, can sometimes go amiss. That said, regardless of any controversy, you cannot argue with the success of her brand online. Millions and millions of subscribers on YouTube to both of her channels. Millions of followers on Instagram, both the Zoella and Zoe Sugg accounts. And the way that her image circulates within the mass media has never, ever slowed down. You know, it's magazine covers and, you know, traditional media. It is ubiquitous products, even her own novels and books that she's written. the whole thing is a kind of revolving circus that she's part of, to the point where, yep, her and Alfie have even got their own waxwork dolls in Madame Two Swords. You know you've made it when that happens. So let's have a think. Now we are aware of some of the successes. Think about the audience theory that we can apply. And we're going to do this in the form of a debate. You will be assigned a theorist, and you will have a certain amount of time to prepare an argument for a debate. You will obviously need evidence from the Zoella content, whether it's her vlogs or her website. And of course, feel free to do some extra reading around the theorist to help your argument. This is because the Component 2 exam will feature on one question that asks you to evaluate part of the theoretical framework and use one or two set texts as a kind of case study for you to be able to show that you're aware of strengths and weaknesses of the set text of the theories, and whether other theories are better to apply. So one way to do this effectively is to consider where an alternative might be used, and to see if they're more relevant or useful to understanding a question at hand. So let's have a look at a question. Which of the audience theories best helps us to understand the relationship between Zoella, her content, and her audience? And the three theorists I want us to consider for this are Clay Shirky, Stuart Hall, and Henry Jenkins. Let's remind ourselves of the theories. So these are the synopses offered by the exam board. I think the first thing to do would be to give an initial thoughts, a mind map, some kind of stream of consciousness of how you would apply those theories to that question. Which of these theories demonstrates the best way of looking at the relationship between Zoella, the Zoella content, and her audience? Okay, have a think about it, and be prepared that you might have to use one of these to debate the case that that theorist is the best one to demonstrate that relationship. Okay, thanks very much for that, folks. I hope you found that interesting. I think there's a lot of avenues to explore there. And as always with the Zoella scheme of work, it actually raises a lot of really interesting questions that might seemingly not be there just from looking at the content itself. Okay, thanks again. Bye-bye.